The day Julian Croft received a standing ovation for stealing my soul was the day I began designing his tomb. I watched him on the grand stage of the Lincoln Center, a single spotlight illuminating him like a messiah. Behind him, on a screen the size of a city block, was my design, my masterpiece, Elysian. He had renamed it Titan Tower, a name as arrogant and hollow as the man himself. The audience, a sea of New York's wealthiest investors and city officials, was on their feet, their applause echoing like thunder. But all I could hear was the frantic, panicked beat of my own heart. He was smiling, his arms outstretched, accepting praise for the lines I had drawn, the curves I had conceptualized, the light I had chased and captured in a structure of glass and steel. He was basking in the glory of a dream he had plucked from my mind while I wasn't looking. For a moment, I was paralyzed by the sheer audacity of the theft. It was so complete, so public. He hadn't just taken a file, he had colonized a part of my spirit. But as the shock subsided, something else took its place. A cold, quiet clarity that settled deep in my bones. I looked at the intricate double helix atrium on the screen, a feature inspired by the DNA of a fallen leaf I'd found in Central Park. He'd called it a symbol of interconnected commerce. The fool. He saw the form, but he would never understand the soul. And in that moment, I remembered a lesson my mentor, Arthur Vance, had taught me years ago. He said, "Estrella, in this industry, they will try to take everything, so you learn to build things they can't see." And I had. Deep within the digital skeleton of that very design, buried in thousands of lines of code and structural data, lay my secret. A tiny, elegant flaw. A digital signature that only I knew existed. A canary in a coal mine. And Julian, in his hubris, was about to walk right into the mine, whistling a triumphant tune. The ovation was for his new tower, but the real design, the one taking shape in my mind right then, was his downfall. For 7 years, Croft & Associates had been my entire world. I wasn't just an architect there, I was the ghost in the machine. From my workstation on the 27th floor, I had a god's eye view of Manhattan, a constant source of inspiration. That studio wasn't just an office. It was a cathedral of creativity, filled with the scent of freshly brewed coffee, the crisp rustle of trace paper, and the low, constant hum of the render farm in the back room, working tirelessly to bring our collective dreams to life. Or, as I would later learn, to bring my dreams to life for Julian's portfolio. I was the one who stayed late, long after the city lights had transformed the windows into dark mirrors, refining the subtle geometry of a facade or wrestling with the physics of a cantilevered terrace. I was the lead designer on the award-winning Oak Haven Museum, the visionary behind the crystalline structure of the Zenith Hotel. My fingerprints were on every major project that had cemented the firm's reputation, yet my name was nowhere to be found. It was always a Julian Croft vision. He was a master conductor of a symphony of stolen melodies. Julian was a dangerous kind of artist. He didn't create, he curated. He could walk through the studio, glance at a junior designer's sketch, and with a few charming words, absorb the core of their idea. "Brilliant, Michael, but what if we elevate that angle?" he'd say, and by the time he presented it to a client, the idea had been fully transplanted, its original roots severed, now blooming from his own mouth. He had the charisma of a cult leader and the conscience of a shark. We were all so eager for his approval, so desperate to be a part of the magic, that we willingly offered up our best work, letting him take the credit as the price of admission. The only one who saw through the facade was Arthur Vance. Arthur was the head of engineering, a man from an older, more honorable generation of architects. He had hands calloused from drafting boards and a mind that saw buildings not just as structures, but as living things. He was the firm's foundation, the one who made Julian's stolen visions stand up. He saw the spark in me from my first day, and he took me under his wing. He taught me that architecture wasn't just about beauty, but about integrity, in design and in character. "Look at the Seagram building," he'd tell me, pointing out the window. "Mies van der Rohe's signature is in every beam, every pane of glass. It's honest. A building can't lie, Estrella. Remember that." It was Arthur who, after seeing a promising colleague get pushed out after her design for a library was claimed by Julian, pulled me aside. "He'll come for your work next," he warned, his voice low. "You're too good, you need insurance." That's when he taught me about digital watermarking, about embedding subtle, non-critical errors into early design phases, a canary that could later be used to prove authorship. It was a defensive measure, a secret shield. I never thought I'd actually need to use it. The beginning of the end came on a Tuesday. Julian called an all-hands meeting, his expression a practiced blend of somber regret and forward-thinking optimism. He announced a strategic restructuring, a move to embrace the future of AI-driven design. The future, it turned out, didn't have room for Arthur Vance. Julian announced Arthur's early retirement, praising his years of service with empty platitudes. He made it sound like a benevolent gift, an honorable discharge, but we all knew it was an execution. Arthur's real crime was that he was the firm's living memory. He knew who had designed what. He knew where all the bodies were buried. As long as he was there, he was a quiet testament to Julian's fraud. I watched Arthur pack his desk, his movements slow and deliberate. He left with a small box of personal effects and a dignity that Julian could never touch. As he walked past my desk, he paused and squeezed my shoulder. "Be careful, kid," he whispered, and then he was gone. His absence left a gaping hole in the soul of the firm. With him gone, I felt exposed, unprotected. And that's when Julian made his final move. He'd been grooming me for months, praising my work in private, calling me his secret weapon. He asked me to work on a confidential pitch, a legacy project for a new skyscraper in Hudson Yards. "Dream big, Estrella," he'd said, his eyes gleaming. "No limits, show me what you can really do." I poured everything I had into it. My grief over Arthur, my passion for the city, my hopes for the future. I designed Elysian. It was more than a building. It was a poem written in steel. It was my heart, rendered in 3D. I presented it to him in his office, my hands shaking with a mixture of pride and vulnerability. He was speechless. "It's a masterpiece, Estrella," he whispered, looking at the renderings with a possessive hunger. A true masterpiece. And now, here I was, watching him sell that masterpiece as his own. As the applause finally died down, a new kind of silence filled my head. It was the silence of a battlefield after the first shot has been fired. The rage that had been a burning coal in my chest now cooled into a diamond-hard point of purpose. This wasn't just about a stolen design anymore. It was about Arthur. It was about every junior designer who had their spark extinguished. It was about the integrity of the work itself. Julian thought he had won, that he had secured his legacy. But a building can't lie, and my building was about to tell the whole world the truth. I slipped out of the event, the joyful chatter of the crowd fading behind me. I walked for miles through the cold New York night, the city's own towers standing as silent witnesses. Julian had left me with nothing, but he had also given me everything. He had given me a reason, a cause. He wanted to build a monument to his ego. Fine, I would let him. I would let him pour millions of dollars and years of his life into it. I would watch him lay the foundation, raise the steel, and reach for the sky. And I would wait for the precise, perfect moment to reveal the fatal flaw at its heart. He had stolen my blueprint, but I still held the master key. I got back to my apartment, the first light of dawn streaking the sky. I didn't sleep. I powered on my personal laptop, opened the encrypted directory, and found the original, unaltered design files for Elysian. I navigated to the structural analysis layer, to the lines of code that dictated the load-bearing capacity of the core. And there it was, my canary, a single, elegant variable that would cascade into catastrophic failure under real-world stress tests. It was perfect. My phone felt heavy in my hand as I found the number. He answered on the second ring, his voice thick with sleep. "Arthur," I said, my voice steady for the first time all day. "It's Estrella. It's time. He's building it. He's building the trap." Arthur met me at a small, forgotten coffee shop in the West Village, the kind with worn wooden tables and the lingering scent of roasted beans and old books. He looked older than he had just a week ago, the firm's betrayal having carved new lines around his eyes. He listened intently as I laid out the whole story, my voice a low, urgent whisper. I told him about Elysian, about Julian's public theft, and about the digital canary sleeping within the tower's bones. When I finished, he was silent for a long time, stirring a sugar cube into his black coffee until it dissolved completely. "This is dangerous, Estrella," he finally said, his gaze heavy. "He'll bury you. He'll create a narrative that you're a disgruntled, unstable employee. He has a machine of lawyers and publicists. You have a theory." "I have more than a theory, Arthur. I have proof." I slid my laptop across the table and opened the directory. I showed him the original file for Elysian, time-stamped 6 months before I even presented it to Julian. I showed him my initial concept sketches, dated over a year ago. And then, I showed him the code for the canary. I explained its function, not a crude, destructive flaw, but an elegant diagnostic failure. The specific steel alloy specified for the core columns, when subjected to a simulated seismic and wind shear stress test at 110% capacity, would register a microscopic torsion anomaly. It wouldn't break, not immediately. But it would fail the city's rigorous safety certification. It was an error no engineer would ever make by accident, but one so subtle it would sail through every digital simulation. It could only be detected in the physical world. It's a test, I explained. Only the person who designed the core's unique geometry would know which specific stress vector to test for. It proves authorship. He's building my signature into his foundation. A slow, hard light began to dawn in Arthur's eyes, replacing the weariness with a familiar fire. This wasn't just my fight anymore. This was a defense of our craft. He built his career on the backs of young talent, he said, his voice hardening. It's time a bill came due. He told me we needed more than just a plan. We needed a legitimate platform, a fortress from which to launch our counteroffensive. My daughter, he said, a faint smile touching his lips. Eleanor, she runs her own firm now, Vance Modern. She's everything Julian Croft pretends to be, and she has no love for him. Meeting Eleanor Vance was like meeting a force of nature. She had Arthur's integrity, but with a sharp, modern edge. Her office, a minimalist space in Chelsea, was a stark contrast to Julian's opulent studio. Here, every project on the wall had the full design team credited beneath it. When we presented our case, she listened without interruption, her eyes sharp and analytical. She examined the files, the timestamps, and Arthur's corroborating testimony about the firm's culture. He's not just a thief, Eleanor concluded, leaning back in her chair. He's a liability to the entire industry. This isn't revenge, Estrella. This is a necessary market correction. The plan we forged that afternoon was meticulous. It was a three-pronged strategy. Phase 1 was my extraction. Phase 2 was the quiet observation and evidence gathering. Phase 3 was the public detonation. My resignation was the hardest and easiest thing I've ever done. I walked into Julian's office, the letter in my hand feeling both like a shield and a bomb. He was on the phone, laughing, waving me in. He looked at the envelope and his smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "What's this?" he asked, his tone shifting from convivial to cautious. "I'm resigning, Julian," I said, my voice even. "I feel my creative vision is no longer aligned with the firm's direction." He tried to charm me, to persuade me. He talked about my brilliant future, about the amazing projects we'd do after Titan Tower. He was trying to keep his secret weapon in the arsenal. But I held firm. As I packed my desk, I could feel the eyes of the entire studio on me. They saw me as a fool, walking away from the firm just as it was about to reach legendary status. Julian himself escorted me to the elevator, a hand placed on my back in a gesture of false magnanimity. "The door is always open, Estrella," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "When you're ready to come back to the big leagues." The doors slid shut on his smug face, and as the elevator descended, I allowed myself a single, shaky breath of relief. The cage was open. I was free. The following Monday, I started at Vance Modern. It was like learning to breathe again after being underwater for years. Here, ideas were debated, built upon, and celebrated collectively. Eleanor officially brought me on as a senior design partner. My first project was a beautiful new public library, and for the first time, my name was on the proposal. While I poured myself into my new work, Phase 2 of our plan was in full swing. Through Arthur's network of trusted contacts in the city's Department of Buildings, and with Eleanor's legal team, we began building our case file. We hired a forensic software analyst who certified that my design files predated any version on Croft and Associates servers. We prepared a technical white paper on the canary flaw, ready to be deployed. Meanwhile, Titan Tower began to rise. It was a strange and painful process to watch from a distance. I would see it from the windows of my new office, a steel skeleton clawing its way into the sky. Every new floor they completed was a knot tightening in my stomach. The media adored Julian. He was on the cover of Architectural Digest, hailed as the visionary reshaping New York. He gave interviews about his holistic design philosophy and the deeply personal inspiration behind the tower's form. I had to stop reading them. It felt like watching someone read my diary aloud to a cheering crowd. There were nights I'd lie awake, consumed by doubt. Was I a monster for this? Was I about to destroy hundreds of jobs and a potentially beautiful building out of personal spite? On those nights, Arthur would be my anchor. He'd remind me of the principle at stake. "A structure built on a lie cannot stand, Estrella," he'd say. "Literally or figuratively, you're not destroying a building, you're exposing a faulty foundation." Eleanor was the strategist, keeping me focused on the endgame. "Emotion is a weapon they'll use against you, Estrella. We will use logic, we will use facts, we will use the law." A year and a half passed. The tower was topped out, its glass skin shimmering in the sun. It was, I had to admit, breathtaking. My heart ached to see it. It was my child, raised by another, and I was about to expose its fatal inherited flaw. The date for the Phase 1 structural integrity test was set. It was a major milestone, a formality, really, before the interior work would begin in earnest. Julian, never one to miss a branding opportunity, had turned it into a media event. Investors, city council members, and journalists were all invited to the site to witness the final validation of his genius. Day of the test was cold and clear. From our conference room at Vance Modern, we had a live feed of the news coverage. I sat with Arthur and Alina, our own war room, silent and tense. On the screen, I saw Julian, looking confident in a hard hat, explaining the testing process to a reporter. He was a king in his castle, moments away from his coronation. My hands were cold, my heart pounding against my ribs. What if I was wrong? What if they had changed the aloe? What if my canary failed? The test began. On the broadcast, they showed a split screen, the site and the engineering tent with the live data feed. We watched as the engineers initiated the simulation, hydraulic pistons applying immense, invisible forces to the building's core. The numbers on the screen climbed, representing tons of pressure. 80%, 90%, 100%, all green. Julian was smiling, nodding at his investors. My breath caught in my throat. Now, Arthur whispered, as if in prayer. The engineers pushed the simulation to the 110% overload protocol, the final step. For a second, nothing happened. Then, a single number on the screen flickered from green to yellow, then red. A klaxon alarm suddenly blared from the engineering tent, a sound so jarring it made the news anchor flinch. On the data screen, a cascade of red warnings bloomed like a virus. Torsional anomaly detected. Core column 7B, structural integrity compromised. Failure. On the live feed, the confident smile melted from Julian's face. He stared at the screen, his expression cycling through confusion, disbelief, and finally dawning horror. A city inspector immediately stepped forward and handed him a clipboard. We couldn't hear the words, but we could see the outcome. A stop work order. The reporter, sensing a massive story, began peppering a frantic-looking site manager with questions. The investors were already on their phones, their expressions grim. The party was over. The king had been dethroned in his own courtyard, live on television for the entire city to see. In our quiet conference room, there was no cheering, just a heavy, profound silence. The first domino had fallen. Alina picked up her phone and dialed her publicist. "It's time," she said, her voice calm and clear. "Schedule the press conference for 3 o'clock. She hung up and looked at me, a determined glint in her eye. "Now," she said, "we show them the architect." There is a unique silence that follows a successful act of destruction. Even when that destruction is justified, even when it is righteous, the silence that rushes into the void is heavy. It filled the conference room at Vance Modern as the last journalist filed out, leaving behind the scent of adrenaline and the ghost of 100 camera flashes. We had done it. We had landed every blow with surgical precision. The truth was out, a wild thing uncaged and now tearing through the city's financial and architectural districts. On the news ticker scrolling across the silent television, Julian Croft's name was already synonymous with fraud. We had won. So why did it feel like I was standing in the rubble of my own making? The press conference itself was a blur of calculated calm. I remember stepping up to the podium, my legs feeling disconnected from my body, the sea of faces before me a featureless mass. But then I saw Arthur, standing to the side, giving me a small, firm nod. He was my foundation. I took a breath and began to speak. We didn't throw accusations, we simply laid out a sequence of irrefutable facts. On the screen behind me, the evidence unspooled like a cinematic tragedy. My sketches, the time-stamped files, the emails. It was a quiet, systematic dismantling. We weren't throwing punches, we were simply removing the floorboards from under his feet. The final piece was the technical analysis of the canary. I explained it not as a trap, but as a question embedded in the design, a question only its author could answer. A building is a conversation between a designer and the laws of physics, I concluded, my voice clear and steady. Julian Croft was speaking a language he did not understand. Arthur's testimony was the final, devastating blow. He spoke with the quiet gravity of a man who had nothing left to lose, detailing a pattern of abuse and intellectual theft that spanned years. He wasn't angry. He was simply sad, a historian recounting the slow, moral decay of a place he had once helped build. The fallout was immediate and absolute. News footage from the Titan Tower site showed Julian's face, a live broadcast of a soul collapsing. For a fleeting second, the mask of charismatic genius cracked, revealing the terrified, cornered fraud underneath. That image was on the front page of every paper the next day. His investors sued him for a sum that was functionally infinite. His partners abandoned him. His firm, once the titan of the industry, imploded in less than a week. His name became a verb in the industry for spectacular self-destruction. To pull a Croft was to crash and burn due to your own hubris. He was erased, and I was left in that silence. For over a year, this fight had been my singular focus. It was a dark star that I had oriented my entire life around. It gave me purpose, a reason to get up in the morning. Now it was over. The villain was vanquished, but the victory felt abstract. I had weaponized my greatest gift. My ability to see and shape the world, to create beauty and function from nothing. I had turned it into a tool of demolition. I would look out my apartment window at the skyline, at that beautiful, wounded skeleton of a tower, and I felt a profound sense of loss. It was a wound on the city, a monument to my pain. The crusade was over, and I found myself adrift. A week later, my phone rang, an international number. I expected a lawyer or perhaps another journalist. The voice on the other end was clipped, professional, and belonged to the lead investor of the consortium that had been funding Titan Tower. "Ms. Barnes," he said without preamble, "we have a problem, a billion-dollar steel and glass problem in the middle of Manhattan. We were sold a lie, and we are dealing with Mr. Croft accordingly. But in our due diligence, we have come to understand that the lie was the man, not the design. Your design for Elysian is and has always been exceptional." I listened, my heart a slow, heavy drum in my chest. "A structure of that magnitude cannot be abandoned," he continued. "But it cannot move forward under a cloud of fraud. It needs to be reborn truthfully. We are formally terminating all contracts associated with Croft and Associates, and we are formally offering the contract to complete the project to Vance Modern on the condition that you serve as the lead architect of record." I sank into my chair, the phone pressed hard against my ear. "We want you to undo your work, Ms. Barnes," he finished, and I could almost hear a smile in his voice. "We want you to remove the canary from the design. We want you to build your tower the way it was always meant to be built." It wasn't a job offer. It was absolution. It was a chance to transmute the destructive energy of my revenge into a creative act of healing. It was the universe offering me a path back to myself. "Yes," I said, the word catching in my throat. "Yes, I would be honored." The following spring, I stood on the open-air observation deck of the newly christened Elysian Tower, just days before its grand opening. The city glittered below me, a breathtaking tapestry of light and life. The last year had been a whirlwind of intensive, joyous work. We hadn't just fixed the flaw, we had re-examined and improved every aspect of the design, working with a team of brilliant, passionate people, many of whom had also been cast-offs from Julian's broken firm. Arthur was beside me, his arm in a comfortable sling after signing one too many blueprints. He looked out at the view, his face filled with a quiet, profound peace. "Mies van der Rohe was right," he said softly. "A building can't lie. This one sings the truth, Estrella." He was right. The tower was no longer a symbol of theft or a monument to revenge. It was a testament to resilience. Its double helix atrium, once a stolen talking point for Julian, now stood as a genuine symbol of collaboration and second chances. It was my heart, healed and rendered in glass and steel, standing tall for the entire world to see. I hadn't just reclaimed my design, I had reclaimed my purpose. The greatest revenge, I realized, wasn't the downfall of your enemy. It was the spectacular, undeniable success of your own rebirth. And as I looked out at the endless horizon, I knew I hadn't just built a skyscraper. I had proven that the strongest, most beautiful things in this world can be built from the truth.